State Board, and I'm editor of the Journal Times. I want to help you understand how to work with the media. The media doesn't know that they are difficult to work with. They really don't. But today we'll try and give you the secret recipe, the secret code to figuring us out. I do hope to do that. And I do believe that if you devote a small amount of time to working with the media, you can make a real difference. Put a small amount of time in on a regular basis, and you can see results. I do believe that. And I have my email and phone number there if anybody ever needs advice, and I think I have it at the end too.
Is it lee.net?
That's, yeah, rob.golub@lee.net.
You all have these slides in your folders too, just so you know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, what we're going to cover today, for the most part, will be how story choices are made, and how to influence the media. Those two things together are kind of the core things. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. I've worked as a reporter, as a columnist, as an online editor, and now editor at the Journal Times in Racine, Wisconsin. I'll tell you a little bit about those roles. The reporter, of course, gathers the information and writes the stories. Columnist can write a story, but with opinion in it. It's okay to have some opinion if you're writing a column. As online editor, I would be more responsible for keeping things going on the website, make sure the website is up to date, make sure it has content on it, and make sure it's functioning properly. As local editor, I would supervise the reporters, and today I'm a supervisor for the local editor. So that I oversee supervisors who handle sports and dealing with laying out the paper and features and news. But I'm still most engaged with news. We'll also, in addition to the story choices and influencing the media, I'll talk about digital and social media. Social media is like Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. Digital is what in the corporate world I think they're increasingly referring to internet as, because internet is not a broad enough term anymore, because we think about cell phones and personal devices, and digital seems to cover more. And feel free to ask questions as I go. Ask a question anytime or ask a question at the end. NAMI I should mention, NAMI is important to me. I know people who are challenged by mental illness, and I know that this is an important cause, and that's why I volunteered. So you're not imposing on me if you ask me a question. Okay, so as I alluded to before, I didn't even know there was a stigma regarding the media, and I think I've since learned that there is somewhat of a media stigma. There's a belief that the media is difficult to work with, or doesn't always want to be helpful, or isn't always understanding. And this was a surprise to me, that there could be any difficulty in working with the media. I didn't know that. And so that's been kind of an eye-opener for me in the last few months. And I think that the reason why I didn't know this is because there's a disconnect. We journalists live in our world with our own culture and our own way of doing things and thinking. And people who engage with nonprofits, people who think about mental illness, people who are in other fields, just think about things differently and approach things differently. And so I'm hoping to bring together some of that disconnect today. As I alluded to, there is kind of a different culture in the journalism world, but there are some things that we have in common. Journalists tend to be people who want to make a difference. They tend to be people who care about people. They tend to be people who are not in it for the money, because journalism doesn't pay very well. And so I think that people who choose to be active in favor of mental health actually have a lot in common with journalists. So if somebody from the corporate world calls me and they want me to put a story in the paper that relates to what's better, Coke or Pepsi, that is just not as exciting to me as trying to do the right thing for a community that represents mental health. So keep in mind, when you contact journalists, I think you actually are kind of on the same team. But the catch is that we are confined by our duty to publish the news. We have our rules, we have our ethics, and we have to follow those rules. If it's news, it has to go in the paper. But within the parameters of what we feel we have to do, we certainly want to do the right thing. Our temperament. Journalists tend to be people who are kind of plain-spoken, kind of direct. We tend to be busy people. We can be kind of direct and kind of pushy. When I hire reporters, I look for people who are a little pushy because I need for them to go and get the story. But I am also looking for nice people who can get along with others. It's kind of a strange personality set that I look for. You need to be pushy, but you need to get along with others. And we deal with a lot of pushy people. So one of the things I hope I can impress upon you is not to worry too much about imposing on the media if you call them or email them, because you could not possibly impose on us as much as some others do. I've been screamed at. I've been hung up on. Why are you so liberal? And then they hang up. Why are you so conservative with all kinds of swear words? And then they hang up. Or why are you so whatever it is? And I never get to find out whether I'm too liberal or too conservative, and then they hang up. I've actually been hung up on, this would surprise you, I've been hung up on by some big name politicians in the state of Wisconsin. I'm not going to say the names of them. So we deal with strong-willed people. So don't worry about pushing us too hard. So despite everything I just said, I do believe strongly that you can see results in your work with us. If you approach things a little strategically and devote a relatively small amount of time, I believe that you can see results. Here are some examples of what you can do. First of all, I assume that many of you already are sending press releases for events, or at least some of you are. But if you're not, I encourage you, hold an event that relates to mental illness and then send a press release. And don't just send one press release, send multiple press releases. And it's a good practice to call and ask if they got the press release. You might not always have the time to do that every time, but for core media contacts, it's a good idea to do. It's a little annoying to be on the receiving end, but it works. Because they call, I get the call, and they're like, did you get my press release? And then many times, what I'll do is I'll say, let me check. And I'll check my email to see if I have it. And then once they brought it to my attention, I'll look at it, and I get 200 emails a day. I fly through things. And then I look at it, and I say, oh, this is a local event. It didn't have the word Racine in it, so I just flew through it. This is something I should pay attention to. So I advise that as a possible strategy. When I get press releases, I try and read through them quickly and determine if it's local and if it's of interest and relevant for Racine County. I get press releases from Albuquerque, from Kenosha, from Madison. I get press releases that are promoting something that doesn't belong in the newspaper, like some company in Janesville sent 3 people to training. I wouldn't write about 3 people sent to training for a company in Racine. And we're busy. So I'm sort of flying through the releases and making snap judgments about them. So be aware of that. And that's why I advise you to send multiple press releases. Take the same release and send it to a few people at the same institution, the same newspaper. If somebody at the Journal-Times calls me and says, what's the policy of the Journal-Times? I'll say, you can send me that release, that's all you need to do. But if I'm giving advice on how to handle the media, then my advice is send a few to a few different people at the same newspaper. It doesn't hurt. Because what doesn't trigger one journalist's interest might trigger another journalist's interest. Or one journalist, they might have their schedule full up for a few months, but then another journalist might say, oh, this is something I can use.
So you're saying you send multiple to several people at the same publication?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Although I am also saying that you also could send the same person the same release a couple of times.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I wasn't
thank you.
saying that, but that's also true.
Okay.
That you can send the same release.
And then I would imagine also sending to several publications as
Yes.
well? Okay.
Yes.
Would you send it to the editor and reporters, different feature editors, the editor, and reporters of that, different reporters? Or?
Yeah, yeah, you could send it to the city editor, send it to the features editor, send it to a couple of reporters, you could send it to the editor. I would say pick 4 or 5 people and send it.
And they're not going to be like, well, I'm already on this, and, you know.
We get a lot of stuff with a lot of names on it. I see a lot of press releases with
Would you let
5.
them know that you've distributed to the other person too?
I look at the email and I see who else is on it, and I say to myself, oh, I don't need to deal with this, and we'll see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So multiple names, so people are aware of who else you're sending it to within the organization.
You could do that,
Would
yeah.
be helpful.
Sure, sure. And then then I can see that it's been sent to other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know, at work, you don't want, if somebody else is working on a project and you're working on a project, and you find out that you both devote time to something, it's kind of pretty frustrating. You know,
Oh.
sometimes a boss will assign the same thing to 2 different people,
Right.
knowingly. So I bet does that kind of happen there, so, but if they're aware that they're all been emailed the same thing, then they may decide between themselves who's going to.
Yeah, that actually probably would work better for the media. I mean, we should all communicate with each other and not let that happen.
Right.
But you're right that it still is possible that it could happen. So if you report all the names on the same email, that's fine. And it's more expedient anyway.
Right. It's transparent.
It's transparent, right,
Yeah.
which is better. Yeah.
You wouldn't blind copy it?
No, I wouldn't blind copy it. Yeah. I think it's good to just be transparent and open right from the start. Yeah. You want to be open and honest with the media as much as you can be. If the media is asking you for something you don't feel comfortable sharing, then just tell them that and tell them why. But you don't want to have a dishonest relationship right at the outset. Does somebody else have a question? When you craft your press releases, I ask you to be clear that it's local and be clear about the nature of the event. You want to have what we call the W's, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how, and you have this in your notes. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. One of the W's is an H, that's just how it is. Those are the basic facts about your event, about what it is that you're promoting. You want to have that high up, and you want to have the fact that it's local high up. And you want to have those high up in your press release, not at the bottom. And you want to have that in your headline and in your subject line of your email that you're sending. So a common mistake will be something like a press release where the subject line and the headline are unclear because it's written more from the perspective of the people who are organizing rather than for the readers and the newspaper. So an example of an unclear press release would be something like Rockin' and Rolling event to be held, sponsored by Harley. Well, I don't know what that means. I know Harley is in Milwaukee, so right off the bat, I think this press release has nothing to do with Racine County. I don't know what Rockin' and Rolling is about. And if I'm busy and I'm having a conversation with a reporter at the same time I'm reading the email, it's possible I could skip by it by mistake. But then if I keep reading, and I read about the exciting sponsorship information at the top, which is what's important to the organizer, but not what's important to the public. And then finally I get to the bottom, and I read, yes, it's sponsored by Harley, but it's taking place in Racine County, and Rockin' and Rolling refers to an event in Racine County. Now I understand what this press release is about. So rather than take the risk that you could get skipped, make it clear that it's local and make it clear what it is up at the top. So that's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. The who is who's invited to this event, the whole public. The what is the event. I guess this event I'm just making up off the top of my head It's a dance where people can go for free that relates to raising money for mental illness. The when is time and the date, and the where, and why for NAMI, and what NAMI is. Yeah. All right, I'm going to run through a few scenarios that people sometimes deal with the media, and then I'll move on to some more advice tips. I love this, by the way. This is a reporter. So you're dealing with the media, and the media seems kind of short or unresponsive. Maybe a reporter at an event seems short or unresponsive, or maybe you're on the phone with a journalist and they're seeming like they're not that interested and distant and short. And I want to tell you why that may be happening. Now, it's possible that you just got somebody crabby on the phone. I just heard a story where I think maybe you just had a crabby reporter that you were dealing with. But also, many times, it's because of the culture of journalism today. Journalists today are actually under a lot of pressure. They are under a lot of pressure. Newspapers are smaller than they used to be. Newspaper circulations are smaller than they used to be. Ironically, newspapers have more readers than ever before because of the internet. But that increased readership has not translated into increased dollars. The industry has not figured out how to monetize the increased readership in the same way that print has been monetized. Now, somebody really smart, I'm sure, is going to figure out how to fix that problem tomorrow, but they haven't figured it out yet. And so in the meantime, newspapers throughout Wisconsin and throughout the United States have seen some layoffs, have seen, you used to do this job, now also do that job. There's been a lot of that. And when I started as a journalist, recording hours didn't really seem that important. Nobody really thought about it much. But today, I think human resources and the corporate world and the legal system is paying more attention, and reporters are under pressure to work their hours and not to go into overtime. So a reporter has only 40 hours, and then the editor says, can you do this one more story? Can you do this one more thing? And so then when you call them, you are that one more thing. So if they're kind of racing through the conversation and they don't seem like they're listening, it's not that they don't care about mental illness. They do care. They just are busy. They just are busy. So I ask you to keep that in mind as you're dealing with them. Okay, so the next scenario is TV comes to an event, which is great, and they cover it, but then you're disappointed because the coverage is not what you expected it to be. And my advice for TV is, I guess, to kind of lower your standards. I'm sorry to say. TV is visual. TV is a quick hit. TV likes to cover visual things. So if you have something happening that's not very visual, they probably won't cover it. And there's not about mental illness that's inherently visual. So that's an inherent problem right there. But if you wanted TV's attention, you'd want to do something that's visual. And then once they cover it, honestly, my advice is, if you can just get them to say the word NAMI or the word mental health, that's an accomplishment. I wouldn't expect a lot of detail from TV, because that's just not how they operate. It's just not how they operate, and we can't change it. Any questions so far? Scenario C. This is my third scenario. A reporter uses the term depressed person instead of person who has depression. Now, it's my understanding that those of you in the mental health community would prefer person who has depression, and then would be disappointed to see depressed person in the newspaper. So, if you're working with the media, I invite you to make that point. You can let them know that that's your preference. but I want you to know that you may have an uphill battle, and I want to tell you why. Because this is an example of how we in the media sometimes have different values from the mental health world. And we're both coming from a good place, but we just have different values. In the media, we believe, in journalism, we believe that it's important to have concise writing. It's important to have concise writing to engage the readers. So you want to have as few words as possible. If it's wordy, you know you're going to lose the reader. And we also hear a lot from the corporate world where they're requesting us to use their jargon, use their corporate terms. Or they create corporate terms that work for their marketing, but don't necessarily work as well in a newspaper. So, for example, the name of the hospital in Racine is, let me see if I can get this right, All Saints Wheaton Franciscan Healthcare. It does not have the word hospital. So if I write a story that says 2 people were taken to the hospital, should I write 2 people were taken to All Saints Wheaton Franciscan Healthcare? So we've adjusted that. We've added the word hospital. Sometimes journalists, we get in the habit of shortening things down and of finding ways to explain things for the purposes of a newspaper. And so when you're asking for that kind of improved language, and I can see why the language is better, a person who has depression, I can see that. But when you're asking for that kind of improved language, that's what you're butting up against. And if a journalist puts it in the paper the way that you don't care for, a depressed person, it's not that they are out to get people with mental illness. It's that they're applying the other value system. And they're not necessarily aware of your perspective. Okay, how story choices are made. I'll tell you how story choices are made so that you can influence them. There's 2 types of stories that are basically covered in newspapers. There's, and this would apply for TV and other media as well. There's news and there's enterprise. News is what happened. It's coverage of an event. So there's a fire, that's news. There's a car crash, that's news. Enterprise is more of an invented story. It's pursuing an idea. It's wondering something. It's something occurs to you. Somebody has an idea to go and do something. News is what happened. And enterprise is coming up with an idea and pursuing it. Enterprise can be investigative, is enterprise work, but the enterprise is more than just investigative, because I could hear about a little girl who's decided to marry her dog to her cat, and I could decide to do a feature story on that. That's enterprise. So it's not just investigative is enterprise, but also feature stories are enterprise. Anything that's kind of an invented idea that's not generated by the news is enterprise. And so there's 2 issues for NAMI with regard to journalism coverage of NAMI. If it's a news story that's just happening now, how will the media treat mental health? But then also, how can NAMI generate enterprise stories, more invented stories, that are consistent with your values? And so you kind of need different strategies for those 2 different types of stories. So enterprise would be, this is something you didn't know about mental illness. This is someone in your community who has mental illness. The ways that reporters find enterprise stories are they may just Google around. It may just occur to them. They may see something in social media, which is why it's good to tweet, because especially the younger reporters coming in will check Twitter and will get ideas off of Twitter. They may hear something in the national news that makes them think of something. They may know someone in their own lives. They could hear something at a meeting that makes them think of something. They may get an idea from management. I may give them a story. That's called an editor special, if I give them a story. They may like my story. They may not like my story. I try not to give too many editor specials because it can create a culture of reporters not feeling like they have control over their own time and they can be creative and so forth. But there is that. I tell new reporters and interns, enterprise work or investigative work is just wondering something. You wonder something, and then you go find the answer. For enterprise sources, reporters will turn to people they've met before. So if you're someone from NAMI who's spoken with a reporter before, they're more likely to contact you. They'll Google around. So if you have a website, that's great. If you have a website that says media contacts with a phone number, that's great. A phone number that if someone calls, they'll find someone quickly, not just a voicemail that's checked after a couple of days. They'll ask around the newsroom. They may look at an old press release. They may remember your name from, now that you're sending out 1 million press releases all the time, they may remember your organization and your contact name when they're working on enterprise. So how to influence story choices. So what I was alluding to before regarding having a good phone number, you want to be available. So not just the office number that is sometimes staffed, but a cell phone number on a press release is better. Or a cell phone number on the website is better. Because what will happen is an editor will go to a reporter and they'll say, you know, my story that I had planned for tomorrow just fell off. The other reporter was working on something that was going to be on 1A. The story fell apart. Or we edited the story, we found problems, we're not ready to run it. Do you have something that you could give us? And the reporter thinks to themselves, and they're like, I don't know. And the editor says, come up with something. And then the reporter sits there and looks at the computer screen and is thinking, and they think to themselves, well, Robin Williams just committed suicide. Maybe I could do a story on suicide. I could localize that. What do I do? Is there somebody who knows about suicide in the community? I'll Google it. And then they find the NAMI website for the local affiliate. And they call the number. And the number says, please leave a message. And the reporter's like, I don't have time for this. They leave a message. And they're like, if you could please give me a call. And they hang up. But then they're like, well, I only have 4 hours left in my shift, and I need time to talk to a few sources for a story, and then also write it and turn it in, and then go home. So maybe the Robin Williams angle is not going to help me. I made my call, but now let me try something else. Then the reporter calls on some other story, and then that story gets going, and then an NAMI person finally calls back, and the reporter says, thanks for calling, but I was able to figure out what I needed. Thanks. So that's why I'm saying, be responsive, be available. I also ask you, when you speak to the media, know what your message is and stay on message. Know what your message is and stay on message. So what is it that you want to accomplish? Do you want the media to get out into the world that NAMI exists and needs members? Do you want the media to get out into the world that NAMI exists and can help? Or do you want to achieve some of the agenda that National NAMI has put out? And in your packets, I gave you some like little blurbs that represent some of what National NAMI is promoting. Know what your message is, and then talk about it, and challenge yourself. I suggest you challenge yourself anytime you have a conversation with someone in the media to refer to your message at least once. Talk about it at least once. I'm not saying like a robot parroting back exactly what's written down by NAMI, but just the gist of it. Just the gist of it. So you're talking to a reporter and you say, yeah, NAMI could really use more membership, so that's why this story that you're working on is important to us. Because if you hit your message a couple times during a conversation, or every conversation, a reporter is going to feel guilty about ignoring it. They're going to want to find some way to help you achieve it. So let's let them know what your message is. Something that does sometimes happen with sources that I caution you against is sometimes we'll talk to a source and we'll say, we're doing a story on mental illness, on depression. Would you be able to talk to us about that? And the source will say, well, I only worked with depression for 5 years. There are other people in the field who have worked with depression for 15 years. I'm not the best person to talk to. Here's the name of someone else. And then the reporter goes and calls that other person and they can't find them. So if you're qualified, I ask you, talk to the media if you're qualified. You don't need to be the most qualified person in Wisconsin. You just need to be one of the qualified people in Wisconsin. And I ask you to be aware that you carry an authority with you. If you're speaking on behalf of NAMI, like a pastor or a mayor, or, I mean, if I got a call from the Pope, I would be, oh my God, I'm talking to the Pope. There's a little bit of that here, I would say. You represent people with mental illness and people who care about them. That makes you important, and you have a right to be heard. And I feel that carries with it something significant. Okay. Oh, there's my message. Okay. So what's the NAMI message? As I was saying, maybe your own personal message is that you need more membership. Or maybe your own personal message is that NAMI should be contacted if there's a local issue that relates to something, or there's somebody who needs help. But national NAMI has a political message. And you have a handout and that has some of the key NAMI positions. And you can work that in, and you can do events and press releases, I would say, that are in support of that, or that connect local events to the NAMI message. So, for example, NAMI recognizes that family support and education is fundamental to early identification, effective intervention, and long-term well-being of children, youth, and young adults who live with mental conditions. So you could translate that into, we feel that family support is important. We feel that that identifying mental health issues in children is important, and that's why we're doing this event. It's getting the message across. Any questions so far? Okay, so given that reporters turn to prior sources of information, like the internet and old press releases for ideas, and given that it's our goal to transmit our message, how can we bring these two things together and achieve our goals utilizing the media? I ask you to think about having a social media presence. The larger the media you work with, the more likely it is they'll be paying attention to social media. So a small weekly newspaper is less likely, but still possible. A daily newspaper, it's more likely. For some reason, family-owned newspapers tend to be less internet-oriented, less social media-oriented, and corporate newspapers tend to be more. And when I say social media, I mean Facebook and Twitter and things like that. I've seen younger reporters with what's called a tweet deck on they open up on their screen and it just sits there all day while they're working. And it's just a constant stream of everything that relates to topics they're interested in or things that they've subscribed to. A great way to get reporters to follow you on Twitter is to follow them. People follow people. If you follow someone, a lot of times they'll follow you back. So you could open a Twitter account if you don't have one, or have some young intern who knows how to do these things do it for you, and you could just have them follow everyone in the media. And then probably 10% of them will follow you back. And then you've got a whole bunch of media people following you. And then when you tweet something, a tweet is just like a sentence of news. When you tweet something, they may see it. You can also tweet directly at reporters. And that's fine to do also. Any questions so far? You want to have a website that makes it clear that you're an authority on mental health in the community, where some of the issues that are important to NAMI are discussed, and where it's clear, it's easy how to get in touch with you. It's best to hold events, things that actually can be written about, and send press releases in advance. And we went over how to write a press release, but there it is for you again, who, when, how, what, why, and where are the most important, that's the most important information, and should go higher up in the text of the press release, and as much of that as possible should be in the headline and in the subject header. And as I was saying, don't be afraid to hit us a few times. The squeaker wheel gets the grease. It shouldn't be that way, but many times it is.
You're saying to become persistent? Is that what?
Be persistent.
Yeah.
Be persistent. Now, of course, you shouldn't have to be, but it helps. It helps. I recommend that you be persistent. And after a story comes out, I recommend that you contact the reporter and say thank you, and say if you have any additional needs or want to do a follow-up, I'm available. Let the reporter know that you're not mad about the story. If you are mad about the story, then only be a little mad about the story. I recommend that you not call the reporter's boss and complain about the story unless you're really desperate. It's best to speak directly with the reporter if you have a complaint. And it's best to if you have complaints, let the reporter know, but I recommend that you also compliment the reporter on what you like and try not to be super picky. Every once in a while there is the source who's really difficult to work with, who is very picky and is just looking for problems, and then that person does not, reporters sometimes will not go back to that source. So they want to be objective, they want to do the right thing, but also it's just, if they're going to complain to your boss at every turn, it may not be worth it for that. What else can I say about that? I'm sorry, do you have something?
No. You're forgetting what you were going to say, and I'm forgetting what I was just going to say. What's happening? Turn my hand on.
That's all right. Yeah, I wanted to add something to that. I guess just it's good to follow up and say thank you, because it lets the reporter know that you didn't mind the story. And it's good, it's constructive criticism. Oh, I know what I want to say. Keep in mind that a reporter becomes an expert on something every day. So you're all experts on mental health. You think about it and care about it all the time. But the reporter is thinking about it and caring about it for 4 hours. And tomorrow it's something else. So today, the reporter writes a story and they work really hard on it, and then you're disappointed because it says depressed people instead of people with depression. Then tomorrow, a reporter will work really hard on a story, and then a librarian will call and say, you describe the person behind the counter at the library as a librarian, but librarians go to school to be librarians. That person didn't go to school to be a librarian. That's a library assistant. How could you do that? And then the next day, a reporter will get a call from someone who says, you described me as a soldier. That's outrageous. I serve my country. I'm not a soldier. I'm a Marine. A soldier is someone who's in the Army. Okay? So keep in mind, journalism is like a minefield, and we don't always know what we're stepping into. And if we make mistakes, it's not on purpose. So here's what I was mentioning before. Best to communicate directly with the reporter if you have an issue. You want to have an open and direct dialogue. Be honest. Be honest. Reporters like honesty. This is a neat trick. If you see a story in the paper that relates to mental illness, you can call the reporter and say, I saw your story, would you like to do a follow-up story? I can help you with that. So there's let's say there's a story that says, like in the Journal Times a couple days ago in Racine, we ran a story about someone who drove into a parking lot of a country club and then killed himself. Used a handgun to shoot himself in the head. And we don't typically cover suicides, but our exception is we cover suicides that are in a public place. The more public it is, the more likely we are covered, because the public is wondering what happened, why were all those police cars there, why was the ambulance there, what happened. So then we feel obligated to cover them. But we don't cover them other times out of sensitivity. So we did put a story in the newspaper about this. And there would be the byline, there would be the name of the reporter who wrote the story. It would be perfectly legitimate to call that reporter and say, I saw you wrote a story about suicide, about a suicide that took place. I'm concerned that there could be other people out there like this person who need help. Would you ever be interested in writing a story about suicide in our community, about what can be done to prevent suicide, about what resources are available for people who are depressed, and reporters are more likely to have interest in stories that jump off of something they just wrote. There is a connection there. It gives them a hook. It could even be used in the story as a hook. In the story itself, it could be a weekend piece that says, in the wake of a public suicide on Thursday, these are some resources that are available. So keep that in mind. If you see something in the paper, it could be an opportunity to contact the person who wrote the story. It's good to keep a list of media contacts. The internet today is amazing. You can just go on and your list is there. It's all out there. But sometimes websites become outdated and they don't get updated as much as they should. So if you could establish who is who and keep the email and keep the phone number, that's good to do. It's okay to call a newspaper and ask, who's the assigning editor in charge of reporters? It's called the assigning editor, it's called the city editor, it's called the local editor. It's okay to call and ask who is that person, assigning editor, city editor, local editor. And that's someone who you definitely would want to keep on your media list. Sometimes in TV stations that person's called the producer, or sometimes they're called the assigning editor at TV stations. And that's someone you would want on your list.
I always thought, just pick out a reporter, but we should email also to the editor, or the editor is first.
I recommend you email both an editor and a reporter.
Okay.
You can do either. I mean, if you're emailing to the editor, then you're emailing someone who can assign the story.
Okay.
If you're emailing the reporter, you're emailing somebody who can choose to do the story. So it's kind of two hits if you email both.
Okay.
Now, if they tell you, it's better to do this person or that person, then follow their instructions. But in general, I'd say it's good to hit a couple different people. Because the editor could say, well, that reporter doesn't have time for it, but somebody else does. Or the reporter could say to themselves, this is something I'm passionate about, I'll hold on to it and then do it when I can get to it, because I have a passion for this. And so offer those, again, enterprise stories are those stories that are stories that reporters come up with, that are invented, that are not just out of a meeting. It's good to offer enterprise ideas at random that promote your message. If you can have someone who has lived with mental illness, who has mental illness, who's willing to talk to the media, that's of value. It's hard to find sources like that today because of HIPAA and privacy rules. So if you have someone who's willing to do it, that's something that's worth offering. Here's a local person who has PTSD and they're willing to talk about it. And when you do the story, could you please promote NAMI? Maybe you could have a breakout box that says, here's how to get in touch with NAMI. If you have someone who's willing to talk. Now, of course, being in print is a powerful experience. You can't take it back. So if someone is going to be talking to the media, and they're nervous about it, they should know what they're getting into, and you want to make sure that you feel confident that they can handle it. You also could offer local experts names and phone numbers who are tied to NAMI. So maybe you have a board member who is an expert on suicide and depression, and immediately after the Robin Williams event, you send an email that says, if you want to talk to someone locally about suicide and depression, here's a local expert who's on the NAMI board who can talk about that. You could localize it, write a local story, and then he would also talk about NAMI, and how NAMI can be helpful. If you're offering an enterprise idea that relates to state or national news, you want to do it very quickly because it's a shelf life that dissipates quickly. So at the Journal-Times, at my paper, I should show you my paper. Here's Journal-Times. I think we're the 5th largest daily paper in the state. So at our paper, because I have NAMI and mental health top of mind, because I'm a board member and I'm doing this speech today, after the Robin Williams incident happened, I mentioned to the local editor on duty, she's filling in for somebody else, I mentioned to the local editor on duty, hey, this would be an opportunity to localize mental health and do a story on local resources that relate to mental health, that relate to depression and suicide. I said, it's optional, you don't have to do it. And then that was the whole conversation that I had with this person. And now I know we're having a story on Sunday that actually does that. Those small things can make a difference. Those small things can make a difference. But what if there was no Rob Golub to do that? If that person, that acting local editor, had received an email that said, in the wake of the Robin Williams tragedy, here's some local resources for you, she might have done it. Because the thing about that story is, it's relatively easy and it's timely. It takes just a few hours to do. You talk to NAMI or a couple other people, you get your information, you write it. It's not something that you have to go and do open records requests for and wait for it to come back for a few weeks. It's not something where you're looking at budgets and you're spending a long time figuring it out. We need some stories that are relatively quick and easy, and so that we have time to then do other stories that are harder and more difficult. And so a story about the resources available for something like that, it's not a difficult story to do. So this is me telling you to offer yourself as a resource after major events. Okay. I'm winding up to the end here, and I'll take any questions you have. But I guess one of my final messages is that I ask you to understand that the media is just people. They make mistakes. They're imperfect. They get things wrong, even though we're not supposed to. They can be overworked. As I said, the field is under pressure, and a lot of journalists also are now, they're not just print journalists, they're also internet journalists. So when I started, back in my day, when I started as a reporter, I would go to the scene, and cover the big news, and then go to lunch. It didn't matter. I didn't have to put it on the internet. But today, young reporters starting out, they've got to put it on the internet, they've got to tweet it, they've got to Facebook it. It's competitive. If they don't do it fast, it'll be on WISN. It's a different ballgame. It's much more competitive now, and its deadlines are 24/7. So the field is still fun. It's still fun to be a journalist, but it's pressured and it's fast-paced. So you may not get everything exactly as you want in a story because of all these pressures and because they're not experts in your field, but you should be able to get some of what you want. You know, it just disappoints me so much when I've heard from people in the mental health field say things to me like, I don't even want to talk to the media. I don't want to work with the media. There's no point. That disappoints me so much because they do want to work with you. It may not be perfect, but it should be pretty good. So you could wall off 15 minutes a week, or a half hour a month, or 2 hours a month, or whatever it is. I suggest you wall off some time and devote it to media engagement. Media engagement. Make it a regular thing and commit yourself. And if you don't get results, after 6 months, send me an email and say, Rob, you were wrong. I'd like to get that email. Thank you very much. Does anybody have questions?
Does NAMI Wisconsin have a designated person that either crafts messages or would craft messages to send out that affiliates could use locally, or would be the go-to person for follow-up stories like with Robin Williams?
I think that there is someone at NAMI Wisconsin who can help you with that, a staff person.
Annabelle.
Annabelle? Yeah, Annabelle who's very good, I don't want to speak on her behalf. Kira would be better to ask that of, and she stepped up. But I do think that Annabelle is someone who's their expert on that. Yeah. In fact, before I gave my speech, I wanted to make sure it was okay with Annabelle. I'm like, is this all okay with Annabelle? Yeah.
It seems like, too, that if someone from the board would have, and occasionally I'll see this, but would have letters to the editor in the state papers, that with NAMI Wisconsin underneath their title, that would carry some weight, as you said, in terms of some authority on that subject, that maybe,
I think so, but I think you also would have it. Where are you from?
We're in Greene County.
Okay, so I think, NAMI Greene County, I think that also carries authority, especially for your local media. They, many times local media wants to hear from local people. I'm in Racine. How do I compete with the Milwaukee Journal? Am I going to cover Milwaukee better than them? Am I going to have better stories? I'm just not. So on occasion, I'll have a new reporter who's all excited. They say, I know we're supposed to cover Racine, but there's something really big happening in Milwaukee. And I say, who cares?
We get the Milwaukee Journal.
Right. I care more about Canada than I care about Milwaukee. I want nothing to do with it. I want local resources focused on local people and local things. Because if I don't cover local, that's all I've got. I can't do better in Milwaukee than the Milwaukee Journal. They will always defeat me and do better in Milwaukee. I'll be outgunned. They've got a much bigger staff and they know the area. And someone's not going to subscribe to the Journal Times because they think we do good in Milwaukee. They'll subscribe to the Journal Times because they want to know what's going on in Racine, and there's really no other better place to know what's going on in Racine, and they feel connected to Racine. So by putting your name or some of your organization's name in your local paper, it creates a sense of local community. So I think that you would be, the people with your NAMI would be an authority, or people in your community would be authority. But I'm not saying you can't call in state NAMI, you certainly can.
Well, I was just thinking, we get the Wisconsin State Journal at our house. And,
Okay.
But that's more statewide, so that a statewide organization thinking through that avenue seems like it would carry some weight.
Sure. Yeah.
How do you decide on what letters to the editor to choose to put in your paper? And what would be an avenue that NAMI affiliates could use to catch your eye?
Sure, that's a good question. We don't get so overwhelmed with letters to the editor that we're just rejecting them. I suspect other papers are in the same boat, where we want to have local voices in the paper. We have some people who write so often we have a limit. I think it's like 30 days or something. You can't be in more than every 30 days. Yeah. So as long as it's relevant, and but there are certain types of letters we won't let in, like a personal attack or an unfair attack on a business, or those types of things that are just sort of common sense. But letters generally do get in. I mean, if somebody writes in from California about how they feel that California should secede from the Union, well, that might not get in. That's a guy from California. But if it's a guy in Racine County who writes a letter, it's a pretty good shot it's going to get in. Most of the time, he'll get in. So that's a strategy you absolutely could use. If NAMI holds an event or does something useful, you could always write a letter to the editor that's just a public thank you to people who participated, and there's a pretty good shot that I'll get in the paper. It's another way to get NAMI's name in the paper. Somebody else have a question? Anything else?
We did have an experience, and this was a few years back when we had a different board, They contacted our local newspaper, and that local newspaper gave us all week to put in letters to the editor in this opinion, it's where you put the opinion and everything. So it was, I'm going to say special guest or whatever they say. And the president then announced what NAMI was first in this box, pretty good sized box.
That's very nice.
When it started, etc. And then announced that it's Mental Illness Awareness Week. The paper put that in. Then they collected letters to the editor at the meetings for a couple of months and then turned them in.
The editor specifically in this talk, is there an understanding that maybe news releases and more of the enterprise and news is a better approach for us than letters to the editor in outreach, or is that by just talking around something, a problem that won't happen?
Oh no, letters to the editor are a fine approach. There's nothing wrong with letters to the editor. A story is more likely to get on the front page. A story is more likely to get more hits online. That's all. I think mental health deserves coverage in stories, which is more predominant, more publicity.
Yeah, that's understanding.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with letters to the editor. That's a great idea. I wish I'd thought of it.
Maybe we should do that this upcoming year.
Yeah.
Get different authors lined up for something.
And letters to the editor, they'll go online like anything else, and that's another Google hit. Anything else?
Back then, we just had somebody who followed up, okay, you can write this letter, It's a little work to it.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right, well, thanks for listening, everybody. Let me know. Send me an email.